In this video, we will analyze the relationship between partially defined functions in math and methods in Java that are not defined for some input values. In math, we study functions, that is, mappings between sets, and values of a domain of definition X are mapped to values in a set Y. Normally, for all of the values in X, there is a value in the set Y. However, there might be the case where for some values of X, there is no image defined in Y. In this case, we talk about a partially defined function. If we want to avoid partially defined functions and always work with total functions, we can restrict to a smaller set, X prime, where all the values have an image. Now, let's go back to Java. Let's suppose we want to compute the square root of 4. Well, there are really two results, +2 and -2. But assume that our method just returns the positive value, +2. We can always get the other solution by putting a minus sign. So we would get 2 as a result. No problem with that. Now, what happens if we call the square method with argument -4? We know that the solutions in this case are not real numbers, but imaginary numbers. So there's really no real number that can be offered as a result of the method. The function is not defined for negative numbers. In math, we can define the functions with more detail. We can adjust the domain of definition according to what we need. For instance, we could say that the domain of definition of this function is not the set of integers, but the set of natural numbers, that is 0 and the positive integers. So the function would be defined for all values in this domain of definition of natural numbers. But in programming, we have to do with the existing types. Now, how do we define in Java partially defined functions or partially defined methods? What can we do? Let's go back to the method that is not defined for all the possible input values. What can we do in this case? There are 4 possibilities, 4 levels of action. First, since it is an error to call square root with a negative number, we should expect an error and the program should crash. This is certainly not the most convenient way of proceeding. Programs can have hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and it is very difficult to keep track of all the possibilities. Second, use language constructs to help avoid errors, either for yourself or for other programmers who might use your code. So one possibility is to use comments. Comments are text interspersed with the code, the objective of which is not to be executed by the computer, but to be read by humans. So from the computer point of view, it is as if nothing were there. Third possibility. Help prepare a useful documentation. Javadoc is a documentation generator on the basis of special comments. If you use these special comments, you can generate a nice documentation automatically. And there's a fourth way, namely to program what to do in exceptional cases. So we program what to do in the regular cases and what to do in the exceptional cases. This makes our program more robust. Let's go over the 3 last possibilities from a bird's perspective. We will go into more details in separate videos. So a comment is a text in a program that is transparent to the computer, but can be useful for the programmer. Here we see one possible way of writing such a comment. The comment starts with a slash and a star and ends with a star and a slash. Comments can go over several lines. In this particular case, the comment says that x has to be non-negative. So wherever we or some other programmer uses this method, one has to be careful not to call it with a negative number. The comment helps us in doing this. Here we have another comment. It is a comment since it starts with a slash and a star and ends a few lines later with a star and a slash. But there are some more stars on the different lines. And this is an indication to a special program called Javadoc. Javadoc takes as input Java programs with these special comments and outputs a nicely formatted documentation for programmers to use. Special commands like @param and @return have a meaning that Javadoc understands when producing the resulting documentation. We will see more details elsewhere. Finally, we have exceptions. In this case, we don't use comments, but programming constructs from the Java programming language. We program what to do for values that are not welcome, so to say. Exceptions are also the subject of another video. It is fair to assimilate methods to mathematical functions. However, one has to take into account that in math we define sets as we need them, whereas in Java we have data types that are not that flexible. We have seen several mechanisms to deal with these partially defined methods in Java. One is general comments, another one special comments that generate Javadoc documentation, and a third one exceptions for handling the undecided cases. More detail about these three mechanisms will be shown elsewhere.